I've heard it quoted before that we are all in the same storm, but in different boats. Indeed, we are all collectively being blown around in this same pandemic storm, which we are trying to navigate safely from our own boats. For whatever reason, God has chosen each of us to be right where we are and share in this difficult moment in creation, despite the huge loss and grief that we have all been experiencing. I welcome you today to Coffee with Katie, my YouTube series that is making a comeback for the month of June, my last month serving Westwood Presbyterian Church. And I also want to shout out and thank my brother Joe for creating the opening tune that led us into our time together today. I look forward to connecting with you all informally over the coming weeks and also at your convenience here on YouTube as we enjoy coffee together on Wednesdays. But my friends, today we are gathering together virtually in the face of great loss. And so please first hear and know this. It is okay if you are not okay. We are living in a world that is constantly changing at a rapid rate as we endure shifting pandemic concerns and restrictions. In the midst of these changes, we have all lost a lot. The experience of loss is one of the hardest things that we can face as humans. Over the last 15 months of pandemic, we have individually and collectively experienced massive amounts of change and loss. We have lost many loved ones. Just this past weekend on Saturday night, a beloved staff member and member of our congregation, Colleena Shatsley, passed away. Colleena spent the afternoon and evening with her son Paul and daughter-in-law Samantha by her side before resting from her earthly labors in God's loving, eternal embrace. Words cannot describe how much Colleena will be missed in our community, as she has kept us connected to our history as a congregation and connected to each other. I pray that the love and care Colleena showed to so many of us and our families over the decades will live on as we seek to do what Colleena so loved to do, to stay connected to each other. More loss has been collectively felt in our country this week, with the grim discovery of the bodies of 215 Indigenous children at the Kamloops Residential School. We grieve the loss of these young Indigenous lives with their Indigenous communities, while openly acknowledging our role in history. We do this with a renewed call for action by all toward reconciliation and peace. Our losses during these pandemic times haven't been exclusive to death. We have experienced many other losses, such as the loss of routines, jobs, freedoms, relationships, hobbies, and anything else that has left our lives. Weddings, concerts, meetings, travel plans, family dinners, once-in-a-lifetime celebrations, and school events like proms and more have been canceled over the last 15 months. We have lost many of the things we previously took for granted. And on top of our individual losses is a sense of communal loss as we watch our work, healthcare, education, and economic systems, all of these systems that we depend on, essentially destabilize. We have lost way more than Hallmark makes sympathy cards for during this unprecedented time in our world. Now, the way that we react to these many losses is called grief. Grief can affect our emotions, our thoughts, our behavior, and even how we feel physically. Everyone experiences grief differently, but it is something that we all experience. When we encounter as many losses as we have in the last 15 months, it is normal for us to feel grief. Grief can be a constant presence in our lives as we think about the amount of losses that many of us need to process. Grief is a normal and natural process to go through after loss. But it can be very painful to work through and express our grief. The way we express grief outwardly is called mourning. Mourning can take many forms, including just sitting and crying, or rituals and religious practices such as prayer, or expressing grief in creative ways such as through art and writing. As humans, we can heal and adapt to our grief when certain conditions are in place. We need to feel connected to a community, to perform meaningful rituals, and be willing to sit in our feelings of sorrow. The problem is, in addition to the many losses we are being confronted with, we are also confronted with a sense of loss over our traditions like funerals and family gatherings, the very things that help us in our times of grief. This pandemic has wreaked havoc on many of our meaningful rituals that help us to grieve in times of loss. This all leaves us with very complicated grief. Now, with the standard rituals for coping with loss, funerals, and celebrations of life eliminated or postponed by public health restrictions, people are struggling to take the first healthy steps forward with our grief. But there is some certainty here, and that is that we are all connected by this shared experience. We are all collectively dealing with tremendous loss and grief. And God is with us in our grief. It can be tempting to want to avoid our strong feelings, but grieving and mourning are important parts of processing losses. When we mourn in a healthy way, we may gradually come to a deeper understanding of what the person or thing we lost meant to us, which helps us to eventually restore hope and motivation. In this way, we can slowly re-engage in our daily lives, even if it is in a different way than before. And so, with almost the whole world confronting losses both large and small, how can we cope with our grief? Well, first it helps to do what we are doing together right now, to name and claim our grief. It is good to validate our feelings of loss and our grief. We need to recognize our feelings and acknowledge them as important without judgment. When we suppress or ignore our feelings, or feel guilty for having our feelings in the first place, we are unable to take steps to move forward in our grief. As we seek to move forward in our grief, it is important to mourn. Everyone's journey of grief will look different. Mourning can help us to accept the reality of our losses, to experience and process the pain of our grief. Dealing with our grief helps us to adjust to the world in light of our losses. Mourning can help us to find a way to maintain a connection to those we have lost while moving forward in our own lives. And so we must create alternate ways to celebrate, honor, and remember our loved ones. In the midst of that, we must establish new routines that include social, physical, educational, and spiritual activities, all of which help us to healthily cope with our grief. Where we cannot have a funeral, memorial, or celebration of life services for our loved ones who have passed, we can still find ways to share about our loved ones. Perhaps you can call up a friend or join a virtual community group in which you can share about your loved one. Or perhaps you can share a memory, the story, or a picture of a loved one with your community on social media. You can also turn your grief into action. Try taking part in an activity, such as planting a tree or preparing a favorite meal that has significance to you and a loved one who has passed. Do something in your loved one's memory, maybe donating to a cause that was near and dear to their heart. Find creative ways to express your grief. Some people express grief and find comfort through things like art, gardening, writing, talking to friends or family, cooking, listening to music, or other creative practices. Spend intentional time in God's presence. Perhaps you want to begin this time by lighting a candle. Then think of memories of your loved one or the way of life that has been lost. Blow the candle out as a physically symbolic way to mark the end of a life or that which has been lost. And it is so important, even in times of collective grief, that we lean on others, even if it has to be virtually, and that we don't be afraid to ask for help or support. We are all in this stormy season together. Just think of how our loved one Colleena, so adored to chat. She spent much of the last 15 months on the phone, reaching out to and connecting with those in our community during this difficult time in our world. And so, let us seek to do the same thing as we honor her memory and her place in our congregation. When we mourn and positively deal with our grief, it is possible for us to celebrate the good, even in the midst of our losses. We can find the meaning of this time of uncertainty and loss Find the meaning it has given to our lives. Perhaps you've developed closer ties. Maybe you've made more time for reflection in the run of your day. Or maybe this time has brought about greater realization of what is important to us and what our priorities are. And as we seek to deal with our grief and move forward in the midst of such great loss in our world, we can also move forward by making a plan for post-COVID. For we do believe that this painful season in our world is temporary. Make a to-do list of all the tasks and events which you wish to partake in when the restrictions ease. What things have you missed out on, and how might you mark and celebrate those moments in the post-COVID world? Maybe you can plan a memorial event or a service for your loved one if you weren't able to do so during the pandemic. It is important for us to remember that everyone will have different levels of fear and grief, and it manifests itself in different ways. That is okay. Avoid comparing your situation to others. When you're already feeling low and worn down, it can drain us of our already limited energy, and it can lead us to resentment toward others and ourselves. Instead, during this time of grief and loss in our world, focus on your own strength and your own coping strategies. Let us together look on each other with compassion as we collectively deal with our loss and grief of this unprecedented time together. My friends, your grief matters. Your losses matter. Your story matters. Your loved ones matter. The way your life has been changed forever matters deeply. And while each individual story of loss represents the heartbreak of dreams that will remain forever unfilled, collectively, they do have the power to inspire us to move forward together as better people, creating a better world for all. Fred Rogers once said, "Anything that's human is mentionable, and anything that's mentionable can be more manageable." When we talk about our feelings, they become less overwhelming, less upsetting, and less scary. The people we trust with that important talk can help us know that we are not alone. My friends, may you know that you are not alone in this season of grief and loss in our world, and that together, through the grace and the strength of God, we can move forward together and find meaning in our losses together. And so I encourage you, if you are feeling low, to reach out to a friend or a loved one, to a community group, or to our church, to our congregation. Feel free to contact myself or to contact your elder so that we can support and encourage one another and uphold each other in prayer together. May we know that even despite this time of loss, we can move forward together through none other than the strength and grace of God. Jesus himself said, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." And as we find creative and alternative ways to mourn and grieve together during this unprecedented time, we do trust that God is among us by his Spirit, comforting us through every step of this painful season in our world.